I didn't even ask why, because I already knew something wasn't right. My name is Nathan Hale. I'm 39 years old. I live out of suitcases and hotel rooms, mostly in Asia these days. I'm the guy corporations fly in when negotiations stall. The closer, the fixer, the terminator of red tape. It was 2:03 a.m. when my phone buzzed, but I didn't flinch. I was in a quiet glass lounge halfway up a Tokyo office tower, staring out over the skyline like it held the next move. The Swiss reps I'd been wrangling all night were out on a break. We were this close to finalizing an $800 million contract. European Logistics meets Bravix Systems shared infrastructure, a deal years in the making. My fingerprints were all over it. When the call came in, I just stepped away from the window, checked the screen, and answered like it was any other midnight call. Grant Knowles, CEO of Bravix, my boss. The man who once looked me in the eye during a Q4 downturn and said, "Only you can do this, Nate." His voice was flat. "Nathan, this is official. You're terminated, effective immediately." I didn't say a word. I just stared at my reflection in the glass. The city blinked behind me. For a second, I thought he was joking. Bad timing, but Grant had always liked stress testing people in weird ways. But this wasn't a test. He kept talking. Legal jargon, HR protocol, something about severance and system access. But I wasn't listening anymore. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. Something wasn't right. Something hadn't been right for weeks. I ended the call and stood there, completely still. Not angry yet, just frozen. Then I walked back into the conference room. I nodded to the Swiss reps as they came back in, smiling like nothing happened. I straightened my tie, flipped open my tablet, took back the room. For the next hour, I closed the deal like my job depended on it, because it used to. And while I was sealing the final terms, shaking hands, and prepping for signatures, I was already planning something else. They thought they'd blindsided me, but I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over, not even close. If they thought they'd cut me out cleanly, they forgot what kind of memory lives in the details. The sliding door to the hotel suite whispered shut behind me. It was 4:27 a.m. Tokyo was still glowing through the curtains, all neon and glass and distant train rumble. I loosened my tie, dropped my bag, and sat down at the desk like a man clocking in for another shift. Not the one I was paid for, but the one that really mattered now. I booted up my laptop. Bravix credentials still worked. Same dashboard, same user profile. No flags, no alerts. Just silence. But the silence was a trick. I went straight to the deal folder. The project codename had been Raven, a mash of regulatory terms from the initial whiteboard session. It used to light up half my weekly calendar. Now, no files found. Okay, maybe they moved it. I tried again through the audit logs. Nothing. No record of me even accessing the files this week. Threads? Gone. Slack channels? Archived. Meeting notes? Vanished. It was like I'd never touched the deal, like I had never been in Tokyo. I leaned back, heart ticking slower now. This wasn't deletion. This was precision. Whoever did this knew where the tracks were and scrubbed every one of them, like I'd been surgically removed. Then I found it. A PDF under Legal Appendices V3, a document with my name on it, my signature, dated and tagged with the Tokyo timestamp. Except I never signed it. The clause was buried in the appendix, disguised as a standard indemnity, but it rewrote the approval chain, shifted all final liability off the executive sponsor, Grant, and onto a phantom lead negotiator, me. It looked perfect. Except for one thing. The timestamp said it was added 5 minutes before Grant fired me. I sat there staring at the screen, suddenly very still. My own name, forged, my digital key, lifted from an older document I remembered signing 6 months ago. Back when this whole thing was still just a blueprint. The truth wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud, deafening. This wasn't an overreaction. This wasn't some bureaucratic reshuffling. This was an erasure, a surgical blackout of one name, one link in the chain. Mine. And here's the thing. I remembered every call, every timestamp, every line item from early drafts, every handshake in Zurich, and every clause we'd buried into that contract like iron nails. I didn't just do the work, I built the framework. And now, someone thought they could ghost me out of my own creation. That was their mistake. Because I remember details. I remember the version history. I remember the backup structure Ava and I set up during the deal's risk mapping phase. I remember the sandbox system I used to test clause redundancies, the one they never knew existed. I remember the trap I left in the infrastructure stack. If this forgery was their opening move, then they hadn't just underestimated me. They just handed me the opening I needed, and I wasn't going to waste it. I was never meant to make it past Tokyo. They just needed me until the ink was dry. 3 weeks before Tokyo, I was standing in a rented ballroom at the Prescott Hotel in San Francisco, staring down at a champagne flute I didn't want. The place was all glass walls, soft jazz, and name tags. Breivik Systems was throwing a soft celebration. Board members, top clients, some carefully curated media, all under the guise of commemorating early traction on the Swiss logistics deal. Everyone knew the real reason. It was a preemptive victory lap. Grant Knowles was in rare form that night, smiling too wide, working the room like he owned the patent on confidence. Every time someone mentioned Zurich, he'd point across the room toward me and say something like, "That's the man right there. Nate brought it home." At one point, he actually raised a glass, an actual literal toast, and said, "Nate's the one who got us here. He's irreplaceable." I should have recognized the performance. I'd seen it before. The board clapped politely. Someone from legal nodded. I smiled back, gave the expected little half bow of humility, and let the noise pass over me. But I remember exactly how it felt, like a thank you card being slipped under a locked door. Later that night, I ducked out to a service corridor just off the main floor to take a breath. It was too hot in there, too loud. That's when I heard someone say my name, not from across the room, but right behind me. Nate. I turned. It was Caleb, my younger brother. He was wearing a black vest and bow tie, holding a bus tray of empty wine glasses. He'd picked up shifts at events like this while finishing his accounting degree. I hadn't even known he'd be working that night. "I didn't know you were here," I said. He gave me a tight smile. Didn't think it mattered. Before I could respond, he leaned in, voice low. "You didn't hear what they said, did you?" I blinked. "What are you talking about?" He looked over his shoulder, then back at me. I was clearing plates near the AV booth. Grant was talking to that CFO guy. Madsen, I think. Anyway, they didn't know I was there. Grant said, "We'll replace him quietly once the deal closes. He won't see it coming." He said it plain. No drama, no sugar, just like that. I stared at him. "You sure?" Caleb nodded, word for word. I laughed it off, patted him on the shoulder. "You probably misheard. They talk in hypotheticals all the time." But even as I said it, I didn't believe myself. Not really. Caleb watched me for a second. "You think they respect you because they cheer when you win. But I've watched people like that. They don't respect closers, they just use them." I didn't answer, I just gave him a tired smile, squeezed his shoulder, and told him to keep his head down and finish school. He walked away. And I went back into that ballroom. I let Grant pat me on the back. I took another drink I didn't want. I let them call me indispensable while they were already sharpening the blade. Looking back now, I realized that toast wasn't praise. It was a sedative, a little ego anesthesia before the incision. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, not even Caleb, was what I'd done 6 weeks earlier. Not Grant, not legal, not the board. That move I made during Phase 2 planning, it wasn't just good strategy, it was the key. I'd set up a holding company during early phase contract planning. They thought it was a Breivik's proxy. I didn't go to sleep that night. I couldn't. The adrenaline didn't come in waves. It stayed, humming through my system like static electricity. My phone kept lighting up with emails from Tokyo contacts, calendar holds I was suddenly no longer on, meeting threads I wasn't included in. I watched it all quietly. Then I reached out to one person who would pick up without asking too many questions. Ava Green, a deputy legal counsel at Breivik's, but more than that, she was my inside line when the stakes went nuclear. We'd worked together through a failed acquisition in Kuala Lumpur, a corruption probe in Denmark, and a joint venture collapse in Brazil. Ava didn't blink under pressure. She just found the truth, no matter how ugly. I pinged her on Signal Dead End. "Need you to check 3 files, contract flow logs, Raven package approval chain." She responded in 20 seconds. Ava, give me an hour. I shut the curtains in my suite and waited, phone in one hand, burner laptop in the other. I already had a working theory, but I needed proof before I made my next move. If I was right, Grant hadn't just erased me. He'd tried to manufacture a version of reality where I never existed, and left fingerprints all over it. 49 minutes later, Ava sent a zip file. No preamble, just the data. Then a follow-up. It was Grant, he authorized all of it. Backdated, he used your name to cut you out. I opened the logs and zoomed in on the access records. My signature had been lifted, not from a live contract, but from a dormant NDA we'd executed a year earlier. That doc was archived, sealed, but its credentials were still in the system. Someone had pulled it, copied the signature layer, and patched it into a new set of clauses, ones I had never touched. 3 forged documents. 1 stripped me of signing authority, 1 reassigned liability, and 1 buried my name under a new set of governance conditions, all uploaded the same day. Time-stamped 3 hours before I got on a plane to Tokyo. I saved everything: secure drives, encrypted backups, physical key-stored copies, distributed across 4 devices that don't sync. I wasn't just preserving the truth, I was building a counter-narrative, one they couldn't tamper with. And then it hit me, something I'd almost forgotten in the noise. A little checkbox during the first blueprint phase of the Swiss integration. Not legal, not executive, infrastructure. 6 weeks ago, I'd created a shell entity to streamline platform deployment across regulatory boundaries. Everyone thought it was a Breivix proxy, a standard maneuver we use to keep naming structures tidy across international partnerships. But it wasn't. That company, Virion AG, was mine, personally registered, privately held. No ties to Breivix on paper. It had its own founding documents, signed under my own name, using my own legal team out of Liechtenstein. I'd done it half out of habit, half out of gut instinct. And here's the thing. When the Swiss contracts started moving into the serious territory, we wrote in a clause for transitional control. Virion AG was listed as the technical steward of infrastructure, the control path, the pipeline. And guess what? It still was. They thought I was gone. But the part they forgot, the part that mattered most, was that the system Grant was now trying to hijack, he didn't own it, I did. They erased my name from their files. They forged my signature into their version of the deal. They thought they'd locked me out. But while they were busy rewriting the story, they forgot the man who wrote the terms. They forgot I still held the key. They already told the client I was out, but the client still trusted my signature. I hadn't shaved, hadn't slept, hadn't even unpacked from the Tokyo suite. But I didn't need rest. I needed signal and leverage. It was 11:08 a.m. in Zurich, prime time in Swiss business culture. That's when I placed the call from a burner phone I kept for side ventures. I bypassed Breivix protocol, skipped intermediaries, and went straight to Clara Vogel. She was lead legal counsel for the Swiss firm, the one Breivix had just sealed an $800 million infrastructure partnership with. She'd been on every deal call, knew every clause, trusted me. She picked up in 2 rings. Clara Vogel. Clara, it's Nathan Hale. A pause. I could hear faint typing stop. Nathan, I didn't expect. Grant said you were reassigned. Reassigned? Like I was an old swivel chair sent to another office floor. I kept my voice level. Is that what he said? Yes. I mean, he told us there were internal role changes. We tried reaching out after the last draft, but the Breivix side said you were unavailable. Unavailable, I repeated softly. Got it. She hesitated. Why are you calling? I let that question hang. Then I said, because you and I both know the infrastructure layer of this deal runs through Virion AG. She didn't speak. And Virion AG isn't a Breivix proxy, I added. It's mine. The silence on her end deepened. I'm the sole officer, I continued. And according to Clause 12.3.1, all transitional infrastructure, sandbox platforms, and tech transfer channels remain under Virion's control until final asset migration. That date, as we both know, is 2 weeks from now. I could hear the shift in her tone when she spoke again. Less confusion now, more clarity, so you still control the bridge. I do, and as of this morning, I've reviewed the logs. There have been unauthorized attempts to access the Zurich node. Biometric authentication failed. You're saying Breivik tried to access? They've told you I was out, but they failed to tell you the platform still belongs to the man they fired. She took a breath. Is that why the data replication test stalled last night? I said nothing. I knew something was off, she murmured. Their answers were vague, but I didn't realize. That's fine, I said. You weren't supposed to. They hoped you wouldn't look closely until it was too late. Her voice tightened. You're still authorized under the current infrastructure clause? Fully. You can check the signed registry. My name's still there. More silence. Then, finally, what do you want me to do? I smiled. Not smug, just prepared. Nothing yet. Just be aware that Breivik's tried to cross a bridge that isn't theirs. And you just pulled it up. No, I said. I just made sure they remember who built it. I ended the call politely. Then I sat back, pulled up the Zurich deployment interface, and changed the node's external access flag from shared to locked. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't revenge. It was policy. They told the client I was gone, but they forgot something simple. The client still trusted my signature, and I had just reminded everyone why. They thought they inherited a machine. What they really inherited was a brick wall. I held the key. It was just past midnight when Jonas pinged me. The message was short. Jonas, Breivik's tried to trigger an override on the Zurich node. Got blocked. You okay? That's Jonas Kapoor, former lead systems engineer on the project. I recruited him 3 years ago from a failing AI startup in Boston. The kind of guy who could read server code like it was a second language. Breivik's tried to reassign him last quarter, called him non-essential. I overwrote it, quietly, permanently. I stared at the message, then fired up the secure console on my laptop, logged in with my biometric token, left thumb, double scan. A second later, the dashboard lit up in red. Unauthorized override attempt detected, 2342 CET. They hadn't even tried to hide it. Someone inside Breivik's tried to run a forced credential injection on the Zurich node. My node. The one with the sandbox environment, the mirrored deployment servers, the final stage demo framework for the Swiss team. And they failed, because Virion AG didn't just own the platform, it owned the lock, that lock. Required two-factor authentication tied to my retina scan, and a live biometric key generated every 48 hours from a private server in Iceland. Breivik's didn't have it. Grant didn't have it. No one did. I logged in deeper, traced the override trail. IP matched one of the Breivik's test centers in Boston. I knew who sat there. I even recognized the MAC address from old system reviews. I shut the tunnel down with a single command. Then I did something else. I froze the entire test dataset. Without the Zurich node, Breivik's couldn't run the client demo. Without that demo, they couldn't get milestone clearance. Without clearance, they couldn't trigger payment release. No platform, no function, no forward motion. 10 minutes later, Ava sent me a screenshot of an internal audit thread. Missing primary sign-off on Raven N deployment phase. Where's Hale? Grant said he was looped out. Not in the docs. No formal removal logged. Legal will want answers. Then Ava's message followed. Ava, internal audit just flagged your absence in the approval chain. Legal's nervous. They're calling it an oversight. I almost laughed. Jonas message again. Jonas, you want me to unlock Zurich or leave it cooked? I thought about it for half a second. Then I typed back, me. No, let them sweat. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the silent screen, the Zurich node now showing a calm green, locked status. Breivik's had thought I was the operator, the one who built the machine and left the keys on the desk. But I hadn't built them a machine. I'd built a system designed around modular control, quiet control, a structure no one could break unless I let them. And now, they were banging on a door I'd bolted shut before I left the building. The next 48 hours would be chaos for them, and I intended to enjoy every locked-out second of it. The signature they never saw coming wasn't fake. It was mine. It was 5:02 a.m. in Zurich when I opened the revised contract. I sat alone at a co-working suite overlooking the Bahnhofstrasse. Nothing fancy, just quiet, just clean enough for me to breathe. I had 2 phones on the table, one secure laptop, a portable scanner, a steaming cup of espresso. I wasn't really drinking. The contract had been sitting in the draft inbox for 3 hours. It was the one Clara had hinted at. The adjusted version of the Swiss deal after their internal legal team began to question Bravix's stability. Apparently, the audit flags, the locked demo, and Grant's disappearing act had raised eyebrows. Bravix had promised control. Instead, they'd delivered silence. And so, the Swiss board redrafted the terms. One key change: Virion AG, my holding company, was now listed as the sole infrastructure partner. Platform ownership, data compliance authority, system migration oversight, all flowed through Virion, not Bravix, not Grant. Just one small firm on paper that had no public profile, no press clippings, no egos. There was only one signature line missing. Mine. I read the whole thing twice. Checked the metadata. Validated the chain of custody logs. They'd done their homework. Then I clicked sign, confirm, done. Just like that, the future of the system was no longer in dispute. Not in theory, not in practice, not in court. The final clause read, all long-term access to shared infrastructure shall be executed solely through Virion AG, or its appointed affiliate, Orion. Orion, the name no one at Bravix had ever heard before. It wasn't a legal entity. It was a strategic alias, a dormant licensing framework I'd registered years ago during an R&D stint in Estonia, built quietly, kept private, designed for this kind of moment. No public footprint, no exec team, no leaks. Virion held the rights, Orion held the roadmap. I held both. The contract uploaded and time-stamped. I closed the laptop, stood up, and stretched. Ava's message came in as I zipped up my bag. Ava, Bravix just tried to call the Swiss board, got denied, they're out. 5 seconds later, Eli, my old compliance advisor, pinged me from Geneva. Eli, you now legally own the backbone. It's over. I didn't reply right away. I just walked outside, pulled in a long breath of crisp Zurich air, and let the silence wrap around me. They had fired me. They had forged my name. They tried to erase me like a mistake in the margins. But the signature they never saw coming wasn't fake. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was mine. And now, the whole deal rested on the name they tried to cut out. Only this time, they weren't even in the room. I don't update my LinkedIn. I don't give interviews. But they know who did it. It started with a single headline. Bravix loses billion-dollar deal to silent newcomer. Then came the cascade. Strategic partner Virion AG Seals. Swiss infrastructure backbone. CEO Grant Knowles placed on leave pending internal review. Who was behind Virion? I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The story moved faster than I ever could. Analysts were scrambling to connect dots. Bravix's investors were demanding board meetings. Some tech columnists tried to spin it like Virion was a stealth mode startup that had outplayed the old guard. Others guessed it was a shell built by rival firms to undercut Bravix's position. They were all wrong, but it didn't matter. The facts were simple. Virion had control of the platform, Bravix had been cut out, and the only person who'd ever had the keys was no longer in their building. The fallout hit fast. Grant went quiet. Then suspended. Then officially listed as on sabbatical. Ava forwarded me the internal memo. The phrasing was soft, corporate, pending resolution of procedural discrepancies. Ava also sent me something else, a meme. It was a screenshot of Grant from a panel last year, standing in front of a giant screen displaying cloud infrastructure diagrams. Someone had photoshopped a steel door over it and added a caption, "When you fire the guy who built the door." I'll admit it, I laughed, not out of spite, out of recognition. They finally understood the difference between hiring talent and trusting ownership. Bravix never got that part. Clients did. I got a personal email from the Swiss Group CEO, plain text, no logos, just words. We didn't just sign with a company, we signed with the man who built it. I stared at that for a long time. Because here's the truth, I never wanted press. I never wanted to be a talking head or a brand ambassador. I built systems, not spotlights. My name was never supposed to be part of the story. But they forced it into the margins. They thought they could erase me quietly, replace me politely, fold me into their own narrative like I was a page they didn't need anymore. Instead, I became the paragraph they couldn't skip. I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't answer PR requests. I didn't even correct the reporters who called Varayon a breakaway firm. I just watched. And when the smoke settled, when the quarterly filings came out and Bravix had to explain the missing pipeline, the paused demo, the canceled client launch, they didn't have to name me. Everyone already knew. I never had to fight for recognition. I made it inevitable. They cut me out. So I built something they couldn't cut into. The request came in through a private Proton Mail address I'd used maybe 4 times in my life. Clean.no leaks, no filters. The subject line read, "Interview request, Global Ledger, strictly off record." Normally, I would have deleted it. But something about the timing, or maybe the silence that followed the storm, made me read on. The journalist's name was Lillian Rice. I knew her work, sharp, no fluff. The kind of reporting that stayed long after press cycles moved on. She didn't ask for my name. She didn't promise exposure. She just said this. "We'd like to talk to the person who locked the door." I said yes, on one condition. No names, just roles. We met 2 days later in a quiet executive suite in Midtown Manhattan. A friend owed me a favor and let me use his law firm's conference room. Frosted glass. Neutral tones. Bottled water lined up like little soldiers on the table. Lillian walked in alone. No camera crew, just a notebook, a recorder, and a calm face that didn't blink too much. She sat across from me, flipped the recorder on. "No names? As agreed," she said. "Just context, just clarity." I nodded. Her first question was simple. "Who are you in all this?" I looked at her. I could have given a dozen answers. I could have said I was the architect, the planner, the guy who played 3 layers deeper than the rest. But instead, I said what I meant. "They cut me out," I said. "So I built something they couldn't cut into." She didn't say anything for a second. Then she gave the smallest nod, like she got it. We talked for a while. Not about revenge, not even about Bravix. She asked about infrastructure, decision trees, the mindset it takes to build a system that outlives its creator. She asked what it felt like, watching the people who underestimated me try to explain away their own collapse. I told her the truth. It felt quiet. The piece ran the next morning. A front-page profile with no name, no photo. Just the headline, "He was the ghost in the deal. Now he owns the system." The pull quote was mine. They cut me out. So I built something they couldn't cut into. No LinkedIn tags, no photo ops, no panel invites. But the calls started anyway. Investors.analysts, people asking if Virion was expanding. If the guy behind it was building something new. I didn't answer, because sometimes the loudest thing a man can do is say nothing at all. They wanted to know who wrote the story, but all they had was the legacy they tried to erase, and the silence I left in its place.